everyone, Corie here. I'm joined by my husband, Matlock, today.
Hey.
And hey. And today we are doing the weekly recap for Bible Discovery and Bible Discovery TV. Our reading this week was supposed to cover Joshua chapter 9 to Judges chapter 9. So that's what we're going to be recapping.
Perfect.
And I got to say, there is a lot of stuff in here. Lots of history, especially in Judges. It just starts to blitz through that history. So yeah, Joshua 9 to Judges 9. Let's jump right in.
All right.
Okay, Joshua chapter 9. So this is all about a coalition of kings and their cities against Israel. Because remember, in Joshua, where we are so far, is they've taken Jericho, they've taken Ai, they have renewed the covenant ceremony on Mount Ebal and Gerizim that's around the city of Shechem. And now they're facing a coalition of kings that have teamed up to face the Israelite invasion. But we're told that one city, Gideon, has chosen a different tactic. They decided to trick Israel into a peace treaty, and it worked. It saved their 4 cities. So there's a coalition of Gibeonite cities. So Gibeon, Kephirah, Beeroth, and Kiriath Jearim. Chapter 10 of Joshua, there's this coalition of kings led by the king of Jerusalem, and they decide to attack Gibeon because Gibeon has just made peace with the enemy, right? Joshua marches to the aid of Gibeon. And this is the really interesting chapter where Joshua commands the sun to stand still, and it works. So the Israelites have enough time to defeat their enemies, and there's a record of him then going into the cities of those armies and taking all of those cities. Joshua and the Israelites, I mean.
Yeah, I know what you meant, don't worry.
Just in case there was confusion. Okay, Joshua chapter 11, there's a northern alliance of kings led by the king of Hatzor, who's named Jabin. Now, we know from history that Jabin, and from Israel, and from the Bible itself, that Jabin was a dynastic name that got passed on. So, it's a kingly name. So when you ascend to the throne, you got called Jabin. Because later on in the Bible, we'll see someone else facing a Jabin of Hatzor. They defeat them and they chase them, and so the Israelites defeat this coalition and chase them, and Joshua marches into Hatzor and destroys it and sets it on fire, and then he marches to the other royal cities and takes them as well. But there's a note that they didn't burn the other royal cities, they only burned certain cities, and Hatzor was one of those cities. We're also told that Joshua destroyed all the Anakites except for those living in Gaza, Gath, and Ashdod. So these are the Philistinian cities where Goliath would come from. Right. So because Joshua was not able to defeat these cities, later on, Goliath becomes a problem for David.
Right.
Okay, and for Saul, the first king of Israel.
Right.
Joshua chapter 12, there is a list of defeated kings given. 2 on the eastern side of the Jordan, so Sihon and Og. And we know that these kings were captured before the time period of the conquest, so when Moses was still around. And then 31 kings on the west side of the Jordan, so once the conquest began to happen. In Joshua chapter 13, we're told that Joshua is very old, and yet there are still very large areas of the promised land left to be taken over. We're told that the Philistines are in the land and they're not able to be taken over. The Geshurites are still in the land and they're not able to be taken over. The Geshurites are important because King David will make a marriage alliance with these Geshurites that will nearly cost him his kingdom, because the product of that marriage is his son Absalom. It's his royal son Absalom. So just keep in mind the Geshurites the Geshurites. Okay, we're also told about how the land was divided on the eastern side of the Jordan between Reuben, Gad, and that half tribe of Manasseh. So we're given the rundown on how that looked. And then in Joshua chapter 14, it's the land divisions on the western side of the Jordan. We're told that Eleazar the priest and Joshua decided by lot, so by using the Urim and Thummim, which tribe of Israel got which portion of land, like what portion of land they were responsible for. We are told that there was a special allotment given to Caleb. who was from the tribe of Judah. We're told that Caleb was given the city of Hebron, but then later on in the scripture, it's going to clarify that the town itself, Hebron itself, became a Levitical city of refuge. So Caleb couldn't own it exactly, but he still retained use of the fields around it. He owned the fields and the pasture land.
Right.
But I guess Caleb got special treatment because he was faithful to God, and he was he and Joshua were the only elders of Israel left. Joshua chapter 15, we're told about Judah's land allotments. We're told about how a very old Caleb took over his territory and was able to drive out 3 Anakites. We're told that Othniel, a man named Othniel, won Caleb's daughter in marriage by taking over a city that everyone thought was impossible to take over. And then, so her land allotment goes to Othniel, and she comes back, Caleb's daughter comes back to Caleb and asks for more of her father's territory, for more inheritance, likely because the land that they had was quite arid. But it's interesting how some of Caleb's family history is recorded in Joshua. There's also a note about Jerusalem, because Jerusalem was within the territory of Caleb and Judah. That to the day that this was being written, Jebusites still lived there with the people of Judah. So we know that Jerusalem was temporarily taken in Judges chapter 1. So that same time period as Caleb, Othniel, and Azkah, Caleb's daughter.
Right.
That's important because it doesn't stay in the hands of Israel, because David has to take it later on as the capital city. Right. So just some back history of Jerusalem there.
Right.
Okay, Joshua chapter 16, we've got Ephraim and Manasseh's land allotment. And we're told that Ephraim was not able to dislodge the Canaanites in Gezer, the city of Gezer. Joshua chapter 17, Manasseh continued. We learned that the tribe of Manasseh had a great struggle with the Canaanites because the Canaanites had iron chariots. So Manasseh goes back to Joshua, the tribal leaders of Manasseh go back to Joshua, and they ask for more territory that was already open, that was already clear and didn't have any enemies in it. But Joshua said, no, don't be afraid of the iron chariots, but also go and take the forested hill country and build your own cities. So there's just some advice that's given from Joshua to Manasseh.
It's good.
It's good. It's good. Joshua chapter 18, we're told that the Israelites set up the tent tabernacle at the city of Shiloh, and to appoint 3 men from each tribe to go make a survey, so essentially a map of the land of Israel, and then Joshua would divide the map via casting lots at the entrance to the tabernacle of Shiloh.
Cool.
Yeah.
Be cool to have that map.
It would be very cool to have that map. Okay, so then the last portion of chapter 18 and all of chapter 19 is about the tribal allotments of those tribes.
Right.
Joshua chapter 20, it's the appointment of the cities of refuge.
Right.
So which cities are going to be the cities of refuge? There's a summary of how these cities were used to save the lives, essentially, of people who accidentally murdered someone else. Okay. Chapter 21, towns for the Levites that are given at Shiloh when Joshua and Eleazar are casting lots, right? So cities for the Kohathites, Gershonites, and Merarites. So remember that those 3 Levites, when they were in the wilderness, had the responsibility for different elements of carrying the tent tabernacle. So it's basically what happened to them.
Right.
Is in chapter 21. Chapter 22, Joshua sends those 2.5 tribes of Israel, Reuben, Gad, and the half tribe of Manasseh, back home. You've helped enough. You can go back and be reunited with your families on the other side of the Jordan River. Take your spoils of war with you. You've done a good job. You've fulfilled your commitment. On the way home, these tribes stop at the Jordan River, and they build a massive altar that is a replica. It's supposed to be a replica of the altar, I think, on Mount Ebal, and also likely they may have done another one at Shiloh as well, but definitely the one on Mount Ebal. Israel, the rest of Israel, is very disturbed by this, and so they call an assembly at Shiloh, and they decide that this is apostasy, and they have to go destroy Ephraim and Gad and the half tribe of Manasseh. So they first, before they launch all-out war, they decide to send Phinehas the priest and 10 men, one from each tribe, to go find out what this was about. Like, how could you so quickly fall into paganism? Because they're thinking they built an altar. Like, they're going to sacrifice on this altar instead of coming to Shiloh. But it turns out that these tribes built it as a symbolic witness as opposed to a functioning altar. So it was a memorial meant to tie the nation together. So it was supposed to just be a religious symbol. Not a declaration of pagan intentions. All right. So thank goodness. Miscommunication, crisis averted.
That's right.
They no longer went to war against each other.
Close call.
Close call. Man, send those letters, Announce your intentions.
It's the basis of a dysfunctional family is miscommunication.
Yes.
Yeah. Always has been, always will be.
Okay. In chapter 23, we get a reminder and a warning from an aged Joshua. So essentially, here's where you've come from. Here's where you need to go. Stay close to God. Don't incorporate into the pagan practices of the land. Joshua chapter 24, we have Joshua renewing for a final time the covenant between the people and God at the city of Shechem. And this is where we get that very famous saying that people like to put in their houses now. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. That's what Joshua says. We're told that Joshua dies. He's 110 years old, and he's buried in the city that was given to him as his special inheritance, which was Timnath-Serah, also called Timnath-Heres, which I know I am butchering the pronunciation of. We're given back matter. So the bones of Joseph. Do you remember when they were leaving Egypt and they had to take the bones of Joseph with them?
It was part of his wish.
It was part of his wish. And so they buried his bones at the city of Shechem, where they did the covenant renewal ceremony, which is very cool and very symbolic. Very cool. We're also told that Eleazar, the priest, the son of Aaron, he died and he was buried at Gibeah, which was in his son Phinehas' land. And we're told that throughout the lifetime of Joshua and throughout the lifetime of all the elders of Israel that outlived Joshua, but who had served with Joshua, Israel served God.
Cool.
Throughout those lifetimes.
Well, that's good.
Yeah. And that's how the book of Joshua ends. Ends on a positive note. You're like, yay! They're serving God.
That's right. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. Okay, Judges. Are you ready for Judges? Because here's where it's going to take a negative turn.
A very fast, quick deep dive
hard
into
left.
180.
Hard south.
That's right.
Drop.
I'm ready for it. We can keep going.
I haven't had much
to say so far.
I know, you've been really quiet.
Yeah, it's been pretty nice actually. Just sitting back here.
Just relaxing. Over there. I'm gonna take a sip of water and then we're gonna.
Well, Joshua's mostly plot line, where you're just kind of going through the most of what they did. So it's really difficult, apart from getting into like philosophical arguments or like the overarching nature of what's happening here. It's not really, in line with a Bible recap of the weekly recap. So maybe I'll post an article about something related to this. If anyone ever struggles with the last couple of weeks we've been talking about the issues with God as a moral monster, some people say, or that God is cruel here, or that this is possible genocide. The last couple of weeks we've been dealing with that. But I'll even post an article down below in the description box, and I'll even hash out some more reasons why this doesn't work, even in just like a very logical, practical sense. Because a lot of people who say that morality is cultural. Well, if this is one culture against another culture, and then we agree that these other cultures are more evil, do you see what I'm saying? If we all hear what's the wrong with what Joshua's doing here, if most cultures agree that Joshua's more, even in a humanistic sense, it doesn't work. But apart from that, I think that there's more to be said there, and there's more to hash out, because I know it is a concerning subject for a lot of people. Yeah. So I'll post an article in the description box, and we'll go from there.
Perfect.
Awesome.
Perfect. Okay, Judges. So Judges chapter 1 records the battle campaigns of the tribes. First, we see the tribe of Judah, which is, of course, Caleb's tribe, and we see them capturing the king Adonai-Bezek and cutting off his thumbs and big toes because that's what he was famous for. So they're doling out the punishment that he gave to everyone else on him.
Yeah, once again, divine irony in judgment. Yeah. You'll see that throughout the Bible. Just God, even like the book of Esther, is always divine irony when he judges. Samson, you just go down the list, you'll see it.
Yep.
Keep your eyes out for it when you're reading. But anyways.
So we're told that they also were able to take Jerusalem, but not completely, which we saw a little bit in the book of Joshua. And again, then we get the flushing out of Caleb's situation and how Othniel was able to marry his daughter. Othniel was able to marry Caleb's daughter.
Yes.
Yes. So essentially, Caleb made a competition for his daughter's hand in marriage. Essentially, her dowry was a city, which was really, really good. So she marries Othniel, and then she asks her dad, Caleb, for springs of water to go with her territory, and he agrees. So we see this negotiation for more land from Caleb's daughter. We were told that the descendants of Moses' father-in-law are still with Israel, and they're called the Kenites, and they live among the tribe of Judah. We're told that Judah teams up with the tribe of Simeon to take land. We're told that the tribes of Joseph, which is Ephraim and Manasseh, they take the city of Bethel with the help of a man of Bethel who is spared with his family. So he's like Rahab.
Right.
She allies herself with Israel to save herself and her family. Also, a man of Bethel did the same thing. So he became essentially an Israelite. There's a note about the Canaanites that Israel couldn't drive them out, but instead pressed many of them into forced labor. So essentially, they became vassals. Right. So they had to pay tribute and taxes in the form of food and goods and services, military service, things like that.
Right.
And other Canaanites were told just lived with them. They weren't even able to force them into vassalhood. Okay, Judges chapter 2, we have the angel of the Lord indicting or coming against the Israelites for not continuing their mission to destroy all the idols and altars.
Right.
So Israel has given up on their original mission, which was to cleanse the land from religious idolatry.
Right.
There's another record of Joshua's death given here in chapter 2. And then we're told that generation, again, that had lived with Joshua, they died, and they left a generation that neither knew God nor had seen what he had done for Israel.
Right.
So they had failed to pass on the knowledge of God to the next generation. And then there's really bad news. And if you want to read Judges chapter 2, verses 11 to 19, it is essentially a summary of the entire book of Judges. And there's a phrase that's going to continue on in Judges that ties the whole thing together, which is essentially, and every man did what was right in his own eyes. Mm-hmm. No one was following God.
Right.
And it just becomes very chaotic and very brutal.
Right. And it even says here too, in verse 3, so now I say, this is the Lord, I will not drive them out before you. This is the opposite of what he was saying.
Yeah.
God was saying in Deuteronomy. Now he says, I will not drive them out, but they shall become thorns in your sides, and their gods shall be a snare to you. Mm-hmm. So again, we're talking about religious and immoral practices that are happening here, that there is a spiritual battle that's underpinning this physical battle. And that these gods are not just like make-believe things. Mm-hmm. Like Deuteronomy 32 calls them demons, that they're worshiping demons. Mm-hmm. And fallen angels is the idea that lowercase g gods, not the uppercase G God, the God of the Bible.
Yeah.
So what you have here is that there's an actual spiritual battle here that's taking place, and they've kind of relinquished or desired not to continue doing it, not to cleanse the land. So that's part of it. So God's no longer going to drive them out. Anyways, that's just tying into what you're saying.
Definitely. So in Judges chapter 3, we're told that Othniel, who is the son-in-law of Caleb, he became the first judge of Israel. So he defeated an enemy king that had subjected the Israelites for 8 years. And then we're told that Othniel ruled in peace for 40 years. Then we're told that a new judge, after Othniel, a new judge named Ehud, was chosen by God, because Eglon, a king of Moab, ruled over Israel from the city of Jericho for 18 years. So then there's this really dramatic episode in Judges chapter 3 of Ehud going into the palace and assassinating Eglon, king of Moab. And then we're told that the land had peace for 80 years. We're told of another judge called Shamgar. We don't know much about him, just that his name was Shamgar and that he killed 600 Philistines with an ox goad.
Yeah, it's amazing.
We're not told why. We're not told any context.
Yeah, but I know. It's so cool. But I remember hearing about there was archaeological evidence they found some sort of spearhead with Shamgar's name on it. Do you recall this? Yeah, this is years ago.
So it may not be the judge Shamgar, but what it does is it shows that the name Shamgar was in the land at the time.
Right.
And in the fact that it was found on a spearhead, bronze spearhead, means that whatever Shamgar owned that spearhead was a warrior.
Yeah.
Yeah,
very interesting.
because often they could engrave their names in it so that on the battlefield they could go back and find it, because it's not just you could go down to the store and buy some more bronze spearheads. They had to make them.
Yeah.
So
no, that's cool.
Okay, Judges chapter 4. So God then chooses Deborah as the next judge of Israel now that Ehud was dead. So it's pretty common with Bible commentaries to note that some of these judges probably occurred at the same time, but in different parts of the country. So Shamgar and Deborah could have occurred at the same time, but in different areas. It's just not given to us in strictly chronological order. But anyway, that's just a side note. So Deborah, a prophet, becomes the next judge of Israel. The enemy of Israel at that point is the king of Hatzor. So Deborah sends for an Israelite man named Barak, and she gives him a command from God that Barak is supposed to lead the Israelite army to fight Hatzor's army and will defeat them. And she ends up going into battle with Barak because he wants the prophet of God to go with him. We're told at that point, the Kenites, remember these are Moses's the descendants of Moses's in-laws, the Kenites, they re-enter the picture here because we're told that they have an alliance with the king of Hatzor. But a woman named Jael, who is a wife of a Kenite, she kills Sisera, the commander of Hatzor's army. And eventually they destroy the king of Canaan, the king of Hatzor. Apparently, Hatzor is the capital capital city of a coalition of Canaanite cities. And his name is Jabin again. So we've got that dynastic name of the king of Hatzor.
Right.
Okay, so that's the history of Deborah. And then in Judges chapter 5, we have a record of the Song of Deborah. And we're told that the land had peace for 40 years with Deborah as the judge. Okay.
She's the second prophet that's mentioned as a woman, right? She's the second one.
I believe so.
Yeah,
I believe
Miriam so far?
Yeah, Miriam was called a prophet, and then Deborah's called a prophet.
Right.
Okay, Judges chapter 6, we have the very interesting story of the judge Gideon. So we're told that the people group of the Midianites oppressed Israel for 7 years. Then the Israelites cry out, and God rises up a prophet that told them, we're not told who the prophet is, but he rises up a prophet to tell the people the reason why God had abandoned them. And essentially that's through idolatry.
Right.
You're worshiping idols, so I have abandoned you. And then God calls Gideon as a judge. Now, Gideon makes God a sacrificial meal, which is not Levitical at all. It's not we can't find evidence of it in Leviticus, but it's still accepted by God. Yeah. And Gideon builds an altar to God. So we see this intention, right? This intention from Gideon, who is steeped in idol worship, to get back to God. God commissions Gideon to tear down his father's Baal altar and Ashtoreth and build in its place an altar to God. And so Gideon does it at night so no one can see him. which is probably the safest option. And this ends up earning him the name a name that means let Baal contend, because his dad has to stand up for him. The city wants to kill him, and his dad stands up for him. And he's like, he tore down Baal's altar. Let Baal contend with him.
Right.
Let Baal kill him. Right? Judges chapter 7, Gideon begins to defeat the Midianite alliance with only 300 men. God whittles down his military power because he's like, no, Gideon, you're not going to be able to blame this win on your numbers.
That's right.
It's going to be on me. As Gideon begins to chase the Midianites through Israel, he calls out on other tribes to help the case.
Right.
He's rallying Israel. In Judges chapter 8, we see Gideon's vengefulness on full display. He kills men who wouldn't give his army any bread on the way. And he wants his young son, Gideon wants his young son to kill the commanders he had been chasing because they had killed his brothers and family. So he's trying to get his son in on it.
Right.
Still in Judges chapter 8, Gideon refuses to become Israel's king. They want him to become king at this point.
Yeah.
Gideon says no, but he still asks for money, for gold, and he makes himself an ephod.
Yes.
Which is something that only the high priest was supposed to wear.
But it becomes a bane to him.
Yeah. Now, this is probably the reference to an ephod at this point is probably like a euphemism for an idol.
Right.
Because idols were often clothed with special clothing like an ephod. So he was probably integrating the worship of God that he knew with the idol worship that he also knew.
Okay.
Yeah. Perhaps Gideon, like it's even theorized maybe Gideon made an idol, an image of the angel of the Lord that he had seen because he had talked to the angel of the Lord. So we don't know, but whatever it was, we know it was really bad. We're told that it became a snare to Gideon.
That's right.
And it became a snare to Israel, who began to honor and worship whatever it was that he created.
Right.
But nevertheless, the land still had 40 years of peace. And then again, but Gideon also had many wives and 70 sons.
Yeah.
And one particular son by a concubine from Shechem named Abimelech.
Never trust an Abimelech. This is what we learned.
Oh,
the name.
Sadness.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
Yeah, there's something about that though, eh?
Yeah.
Okay, so in Judges chapter 9, this son of Gideon by a concubine in Shechem named Abimelech murders the 70 sons of Gideon, except for the youngest son. He escapes. The youngest son escapes. And Abimelech is crowned the king of Shechem. So we see this power takeover. Now, Abimelech rules for 3 years, but the city of Shechem begins to turn against him. It ends in this dramatic battle, and Abimelech destroys the city of Shechem.
Yeah.
Keep in mind, like, this is where Shechem is where the covenant was renewed. Shechem is where Joseph is buried. Like, come on, guys.
Yeah.
So Abimelech destroys the temple fortress of Shechem. So there was a big fortress in the city of Shechem, in the ancient city of Shechem, where we're told about 1,000 people were hiding in it, and he burns it.
Yeah.
He burns it while they're in it. Abimelech then goes to Thebes to take that city, and there's a stronghold tower there as well.
Yeah.
And a woman chucks a millstone,
Yes.
which is something that you use to grind grain, probably a handheld one.
Yeah.
And it hits him on the head, and he dies.
Well, not quite, because he's like, servant, kill me, so no one tells
Kill
them
me.
that a woman killed me.
Okay.
Yeah, well, now we all know, so it's too late to build
There, a long time ago,
Yeah.
years and years ago, there was an article in Biblical Archaeology Review of a bunch of women archaeologists who were working at the city of Shechem. And they had a great old time recreating this scene because they got a bunch of millstones because they were responding to an article of someone who had said, this is probably not realistic because how could a woman throw a millstone?
Yeah.
So they got all these millstones and they all took turns chucking them from the walls of ancient Shechem at watermelons with faces drawn on them.
Yeah.
And they got them.
Yeah.
They
Good.
got
but,
them.
Yeah.
So it's real.
Yeah.
It's possible. It is plausible.
But they're also, I'm sure, like, you're working out all day in the fields. You're pretty much more buff than we are today.
I'm sure the ancient women were probably quite buff.
Yeah, I think so.
But even still, it's just a big stone. It's not like, it wouldn't have been one of the big commercial ones that weighs 1,000 pounds.
That's right.
It would have been.
So that's good aim. Good shot.
Good aim. Good shot.
For softball.
So at the end of this chapter, Abimelech gets his punishment and the city of Shechem gets their punishment. So it's no one wins here.
Right.
No one wins here. Like, sure, there was 40 years of peace after Gideon's judgeship, but it's pretty brutal. The results are pretty brutal. So it's really showing, the book of Judges is really showing how when you stray away from God, there are really brutal and natural consequences.
Yeah. Every time I read Judges, I can't help but think about spaghetti westerns. Like,
I see what you mean.
It just reads, like, every bit of it is like, it's full of divine irony. It's full of greed. It's full of just, like, revenge.
Wild stories.
It's just pure spaghetti westerns. If any filmmakers out there, you have a complete database of beautiful spaghetti westerns you can make. Anyways, but no, it's the cyclical pattern of sin that happens here. Like 40 years on, 40 years off, they repent, they come back, right? Yeah. And then they do it again, and then they fall into sin and snare. And it's usually always oppression that's followed by it, right? And then once they repent, they get restored again. But then 40 years later, which is like a generation essentially.
Yeah.
And
very, very modified by the leaders that are leading them.
Yeah.
Like you can have good leaders like Deborah, who was a prophet of God who tried to bring the people back to God.
Right.
And then you have other leaders who are just military leaders and they kind of try, like Gideon, but then end up failing miserably because they're not staying true to who God is. They're trying to mix their current culture with worship of God.
Which is like always the bane. This is the reason why God kept the culture so distinct.
Yeah.
Was because you inherently mix your culture with your religion just by nature. Like, you even see that today with people who are cultural Christianity, right? People just mix.
So easy to do.
So easy to mix your culture religion because culture is just your religion externalized essentially. So it's like when you are just looking at people, you just assume that this is the norm, this is the way it ought to be. Especially if they have the same foundational values as you, might not be accurate. But then you start believing like, oh, the outward expressions of the things that they do are the same thing as their foundation. So it can easily become mixed and integrated, and it happens in each generation. So that's the reason why the Word of God is so important. So you have that distinction that's clear.
Yeah, you need to study the Word of God, and you need to self-reflect on your life see where you are allowing your culture to dictate your faith, and what needs to change.
That's right.
Yeah.
Cool.
Okay, we have more Judges to go next week. If you have any comments or questions, leave them down below and we'll get back to you. Hope you're having a good one. See ya. Thank you so much for watching. We want to keep producing high-quality biblical content, but we can't do it without your support. If you feel called to support us, please click the link in the description under Donate. Your support really means a lot to us.